Hi everyone, Tom Fletcher here, and I'm going to be reading some of my book called The Creakers to you now. It's illustrated by the brilliant Shane Debris. Make yourself comfy, we are about to begin. What silently waits in the shadows at night? What's under your bed, keeping just out of sight? What's patiently waiting while you're counting sheep? What never comes out unless you're fast asleep? What makes all those creaks, cracks and clangs in your house? It isn't the cat, or a dog, or a mouse. Those noises are made by mysterious creatures. Read on if you dare, and you might meet the Creakers. Prologue. The night it all began. The sun disappeared behind the pointed silhouettes of the rooftops of Whiffington town like a hungry black dog swallowing a bowl of flames. A thick, eerie darkness fell like no other night Whiffington had ever known. The moon itself barely had enough courage to peek around the clouds as though it knew that tonight something strange was going to happen. Mothers and fathers throughout Whiffington tucked their children into bed, unaware that this would be the last bedtime story, the last goodnight kiss, the last time they'd switch off the light. Midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Creak. A strange noise broke the silence. It came from inside one of the houses. With the whole town fast asleep, who could possibly have made that sound? Or perhaps not who, but what? Creak. There it was again. This time from another house. Creak, creak, creak. The sound of creaky wooden floorboards echoed around the hallways of every home in Whiffington. Something was inside. Something was creaking about. Something not human. There were no screams. There were no nightmares. The children slept peacefully, wonderfully unaware that the world around them had changed. It had all happened silently, as if by some strange sort of dark magic, and they wouldn't know anything about it until they woke up the next morning on the day it all began. Chapter 1. The Day It All Began. Let's start on the day it all began. On the day it all began, Lucy Dunkston woke up. Right, well, that's a start, but it's not very exciting, is it? Let's try that again. On the day it all began, Lucy Dunkston woke up to a rather unusual sound. Okay, that's a little better. Let's see what happens next. It was the sound of the alarm clock ringing in her mum's bedroom. Well, yeah, it's got a bit boring again, hasn't it? Let's try that bit one more time. It was the sound of the alarm clock ringing in her mum's bedroom because Lucy's mum wasn't there to switch it off. You see, Lucy was about to find out that while she was asleep in the night, her mum had disappeared. Imagine waking up to find that your mum had disappeared in the night. It gives me creepy tingles every time I tell this story. I bet you're thinking, this is going to be the best scary story ever. I can't wait to read it and tell all my friends that I'm really brave because I read it and I wasn't even one bit scared, even though you were totally scared all the way through. Well, this is just the beginning. Wait until you read what happens later when the Creakers come out. Let me know if you get scared. Because I am. Back on the day it all began, Lucy climbed out of bed, slipped on her fluffy blue dressing gown and walked across her creaky floorboard, which were warm from the morning sunlight creeping through the curtains. Would you like to know what Lucy looked like? Of course you would. Here's a picture. There she is. As you can see, she had shorter hair than most girls, and it was brown as mud. Or chocolate, and even though Lucy liked it to be short, her mum insisted that she keep a fringe. It stops you looking like a boy, her mum would say. This was before she disappeared, of course. And this really wound Lucy up, as her fringe always seemed to flop in front of her eyes, meaning she constantly had to lick her hand and slick it to one side just so she could see. Her eyes, once the fringe was out of the way, were greeny brown, or perhaps browny green. Either way, they were a bit of green and a bit of brown. You could say there was nothing particularly remarkable about Lucy at all, and it's true. She was no different from any other child in Whiffington, which is another way of saying she was quite remarkable indeed. Anyway, more about that later. "Mum!" Lucy called, padding across the landing towards her mum's bedroom. But of course, you already know there was no reply because her mum was gone. Lucy's heart started beating faster in her chest as she gently opened the bedroom door and stuck her head inside. Mrs. Dunstan's book was still on the bedside table, bookmark poking out, with her reading glasses perched on top. Her empty cocoa cup with a yellow polka dot pattern sat beside it. Her slippers were neatly positioned on the floor. It was all as it usually was, except for the piercing ring of the alarm clock and the spooky empty bed. Lucy stopped the alarm clock and ran to check the bathroom. Empty bath, empty shower, empty loo, although Lucy would have been very surprised to find her mum hiding in there. She ran downstairs, empty kitchen, empty living room, empty everywhere. "Mum! Mum!" she called, a note of panic in her voice, and her heart leaping like a frog in her chest. She was beginning to get an awful feeling that something terrible might have happened, and it was a feeling that Lucy already knew. You see, the really creepy thing was that this wasn't the first time it had happened to Lucy Dunstan. A few months ago, her dad vanished too. Unbelievable, right? Lucy's mum had been devastated. "Must have ran off with another woman," Lucy heard one of the other mums whispering in the school playground. "What a cheating, rotten man," another had said, shaking her head. But Lucy didn't think her dad was rotten at all. She couldn't believe that he'd run off without saying goodbye to her, without leaving a note, without saying where he was going, without finishing the half-eaten chocolate hobnob, barely sipped cup of tea she found on his bedside table the next morning. So on this morning, on the day it all began, Lucy had the strangest feeling that somehow this was all connected, that something weird was going on. Lucy ran down the hallway, snatched up the phone from the little wobbly table and dialed her mum's mobile number, which she knew off by heart for emergencies like every sensible 11-year-old should. But as her mum's phone started ringing, Lucy saw it flashing on the arm of the sofa. Lucy ended the call and hung her head in defeat. Defeat. Feet. Shoes. Her mum's shoes. She ran to the front door. A pair of cosy, flat slip-ons with flower-shaped sparkly bits were sitting on the mat, exactly where her mum had kicked them off every night and where she'd slipped back into them before leaving the house each day. Well, surely her mum wouldn't have left the house without her shoes, would she? Lucy's heart sank. This all seemed far too familiar. On the day her father disappeared, one of the strangest things was that his favourite chunky black boots with the yellow laces, which he wore every single day, was still sitting by the front door, like he'd never left. Just like her mum's shoes. Lucy knew there was only one thing for it. She was going to have to call the police. She'd never done that before, and her heart was pounding like a drum in her chest as she pressed the number 9 3 times with a shaky, nervous finger. Now, what do you suppose happened next? If you think a police officer answered the phone and said, "It's okay, Lucy, we found your mum and we'll bring her home right away and we'll even pick up some breakfast for you too. What would you like?" Then you'd be very wrong indeed, and you should probably never write a book. What actually happened was possibly the worst thing Lucy could think of. Nothing. The phone just rang and rang and rang and carried on ringing until Lucy hung up. Since when did the police not answer the phone? Lucy said to herself, her voice sounding unusually loud in the empty house. A little voice in her head told her the answer: when something spooky is going on. Lucy pulled open the front door and stepped out into the stinking morning air. Oh, it was quite normal for the air to be stinking outside the Dunstan family's house. It wasn't the house that smelled, it was the truck parked in the driveway. It was one of those clunky, chunky, nostril-stinging, rubbish-collecting trucks that trundle around town with those jolly-looking grubby people in grimy overalls collecting everyone's rotten rubbish bags. Lucy's dad had been one of those jolly-looking, grubby, rubbish-collecting people. He was the bin man for Whiffington Town, where he lived. Sorry, used to live before he disappeared. Since he vanished, his truck had been parked in the driveway, stinking out the whole street. Of course, Mrs. Dunstan had tried to sell the truck, but no one wanted a stinky old thing like that. Even Whiffington scrap metal said that the pong was too strong for them to crush it. And so, there it stayed, on Lucy's driveway. If you ever find yourself behind one of these trucks, take a little sniff, just a little one, and you'll know what Lucy Dunstan's house smelled like. Anyway, back to the day it all began. Out in Lucy's street, Clutter Avenue, she noticed instantly that things weren't right. Usually there was a long line of traffic that was clogging up the road as mums and dads took their kids to school and went to work and drove past the post office and the hairdressers and did all the boring stuff that grown-ups do. But today, the road wasn't busy. It wasn't just not busy, it was completely deserted. Not a single car. Lucy looked left, and she looked right, and then left again, and then right again, and then she repeated that about 20 more times, which I won't bother to write because that would just be silly. But when she had finished, she was convinced that she was right. Something weird was definitely happening in Whiffington Town. What the jiggins is going on, she said to herself. What the jiggins indeed, Lucy. Where was Mr. Ratcliffe, the rinky old man who did yoga in his front garden in his underpants? He claimed it was the secret to staying young. And where was Molly, the milk lady who delivered fresh bottles of milk from her electric van? Where was Mario, the Italian man from the next street who jogged past every morning in his skimpy lycra shorts? Where was everyone? That was when Lucy heard a noise. Her heart leapt. Oh, was it her mum? A long, slow creak came from somewhere along Clutter Avenue, followed by a sudden clang. Hello? Lucy called. Mama? A small voice asked from behind the garden fence 2 doors down. Oh, Ella, it's just you. Lucy sighed in relief as Ella Annoying appeared. First, her bouncy afro hair peeked out into the street, followed by her round cheeks and her big, deep brown eyes that always managed to get her out of trouble. She was wearing her bright pink pyjamas made of shiny silk with her initials embroidered on the pocket. In one hand was a pair of pink heart-shaped designer sunglasses. Lucy never saw Ella anywhere without those. Lucy, I can't find Mama or Papa and my avocado needs mashing. Ella whined. Before Lucy could reply, another door opened across the street. Dad, whispered Norman Quirk, a boy from Lucy's year at school, as he hesitantly stepped out into his front garden. Norman was dressed in a pristinely ironed, meticulously clean scout uniform, which was covered in the most achievement badges Lucy had ever seen. Here's a list of some of Norman's badges. A tree climbing badge, a tent pitching badge, a badge for spreading butter on toast all the way to the edges, the indoor challenge badge, the outdoor challenge badge, the shake it all about door challenge badge, the bed making badge, the cake baking badge, and eating the cake you bake in the bed you make badge, the remembering to wash your belly button badge, and even a badge for collecting lots of badges badge. And there are a few empty spots on his uniform he needed to fill with new badges. Oh, hi, good morning, civilians, Norman said, nervously holding up 3 fingers in scout salute before fiddling with his neatly combed mousy blonde hair. With his other hand, he covered his mouth to hide his train track braces. You haven't seen my dad, have you? He asked, scooping a handful of mud from his front garden and sniffing it, as if trying to pick up his dad's scent. When Norman bent down, Lucy caught sight of his Transformers socks. Ella giggled at him, not really in a mean way, just because she found Norman sort of funny. Everyone did. Norman was different. Sometimes people who are different get laughed at, but it's always the different ones that make a difference. Lucy heard her dad's voice in her head. He had his own way of looking at things. On cloudy days, he'd tell Lucy, well, the sun just needs a holiday so it can shine better tomorrow. When she came second to her friend Georgina in the sack race on sports day, he told her, "Don't be upset, you just made your friend really happy." And when she asked him if he liked being a bin man, he said, "You'd be surprised what some people throw away, Lucy. One man's rubbish is another man's favourite pair of black boots." And he clicked his heels together with a wink. "No, I've not seen your dad, sorry," Lucy said, shaking off her daydream about her own father and elbowing Ella to stop her from laughing. "My mum's missing too." Suddenly another door opened and Sissy McNabb ran out into the street in tears. Then Toby Cobblesmith, who had his shoes on the wrong feet. Next out came William Trundle and Brenda Payne, searching for their mum and dad. Then another kid, and another, until one by one, every single kid in Whiffington Town came stumbling out of their houses in their PJs, dressing gowns and slippers, trying to find their parents. Nads and granddads, aunts and uncles, they were all gone too. There wasn't a single grown-up to be seen. There was such a kerfuffle in Clutter Avenue. Some children were crying, others were laughing, and a few were still fast asleep in bed and hadn't noticed anything yet. "What's going on?" they shouted, the ones who were awake. "Where are our parents?" they called. "What are we going to do?" they yelled. Lucy took a breath and tried to think. What would Mum do? She said to herself. How did Mum find out what's going on in the world? And before she knew what she was doing, Lucy found herself clambering onto the steps of her dad's stinking rubbish truck, and above the noise she yelled, "The news!" There was silence. Everyone turned to look at Lucy. "We have to watch the news. I know it's super boring, but whenever my mum wants to know what's going on in the world, she always watches the news," she told them. The children looked at each other, uncertain. "I'm sure you know that the news is the biggest snorefest on TV, but Lucy had a point." "She's right," Norman whispered to Ella, too frightened to say it out loud. "She's right!" Ella shouted, not frightened of anyone. "To the television!" they all cried in unison, and every child on Clutter Avenue in Whiffington Town pushed past Lucy and piled into her house. In a matter of seconds, her living room was full from the carpet to the ceiling with scared children in their PJs. There were children sitting on the floor. There were children sitting on the children sitting on the floor. There were even children sitting on the children sitting on the children sitting on the floor. They were all terrified. Mainly because their parents were missing, but also a little bit freaked out because they were about to watch the news without being made to. Lucy switched on the TV. "Have you got any popcorn?" asked a child sitting on the floor. "Sorry, I don't think we do," replied Lucy. "Chocolate hobnobs?" asked a child sitting on the floor. "No chocolate hobnobs either. Mum doesn't buy those anymore. Not since... Well, never mind. We just don't have any." "You mean we have to watch TV without any snacks?" moaned Ella, who was sitting on the floor. "Oh, okay, I'll see what we've got," promised Lucy, whizzing off to the kitchen. She returned a few minutes later with all the boxes of cereal from the cupboard and handed them around the room. "Take a handful and pass it on," she said, then got back to finding the 24-hour news channel. The moment it flicked on, her heart stopped. "Oh no," Lucy cried. "Look!" The crowd of children all spat out their cornflakes and Cheerios in shock, showering the room with chewy bits of soggy cereal. On the TV, they could see the normal news desk, the normal sheets of paper and the normal coffee mug, but there was something very not normal about it. The news presenter was missing. Ella pushed through to the front. "Try another channel. Maybe your TV's broken, Lucy. Don't you have a TV repair badge?" she demanded, turning to Norman, who tried his best to hide when everyone looked at him. "Well, perhaps I could take a look," he said sheepishly, as the children nudged him across the room towards the telly. "Sorry, oops, watch out," he muttered as he stepped on almost everyone's fingers. "Well, why isn't it working?" Ella said, bashing the remote on the side of the TV. Well, I actually do have a badge in TV remote control functions, and as the only one member of Whiffington Scout Troop present today, aren't you the only member of the Scout Troop, full stop?" asked Ella. Everybody laughed. Norman sat down, looking defeated, on what he thought was the arm of the sofa, but it was actually the head of another child sitting on another child. "Here, just do your best." Lucy said, taking the remote from Ella and handing it to Norman. Norman smiled at her, for once forgetting to cover his braces. He flicked through the channels, hoping to find a grown-up of any kind looking back out at them. Silly Sunrise, the kids show, had no Funzo the Clown, getting pied in the face today. Wakey Wakey Whiffington had no Piers Snorgan, although that was probably an improvement. Norman flicked through the sports channels, the shopping network, the cooking shows, Whiffington Weather, and just about every channel he could think of. Not a single one of them had a single grown-up. It was almost as if every adult on the planet just disappeared overnight, from Lucy's mum to the news presenter. They had all just gone. Okay, this isn't the next chapter, but I just wanted to check that you're all alright. I know it gets a bit spooky, but trust me, it all works out in the end. Or at least, I think it does. Maybe. Actually, you know, I can't remember how it goes. It might get really, really scary. I guess we'll just have to keep going and find out. Chapter 2, The Goodbye Note. The children all looked at Lucy, waiting to be told what they should do next, and wondering if she had any more cereal. I wish I had an answer for you all, Lucy said apologetically, and more cereal, but I'm afraid I've no idea what to do, and you've eaten all the snacks I've got. A bunch of little kids started crying, some of the older kids too. They asked me not to write that in this book, but I'm going to anyway, just so you know how bad it was. Well, wouldn't you cry if there was no more cereal left, especially on the day that your mum and dad went missing? Think, Lucy, think, Lucy thought to herself. I'm trying to think, but you keep talking, Lucy thought back. Her mind was quiet for a moment, but all she could think of was how much she wished they taught you at school what to do if you ever woke up and your mum was missing. That would be far more useful than the 6 times table. That's it! Lucy shouted, suddenly making half the room jump. What's it? Replied Norman as he unpacked a camping stove from his satchel and started preparing a full English breakfast. School, of course, Lucy cried. Everyone looked at her as if she'd lost the plot. We need to go to school, she repeated. First you want to watch the news, now you want to go to school. What sort of kid are you? Ella asked, slipping on her heart-shaped sunglasses even though they were inside, like some sort of Whiffington celebrity. The kind who wants to find out what's going on and get our parents back. Now, I've tried the police, we've tried the television, now there's only one place left. School, said Lucy. The crowd of watching children blinked in unison. No one really wanted to go to school, but once again, Lucy had a point. Right, I'm off. Who's coming with me? Lucy said, hopefully. There was a very unenthusiastic mumble from the other kid. Yeah, right. Suppose so. If we have to. Are you sure there's no more cereal? But my eggs aren't poached yet, said Norman, looking at his stopwatch. Lucy ignored all of them and climbed over their heads and disappeared out of the room. A few moments later, she bounced back in, wearing her school uniform, looking ready for a normal day at school. What are you wearing that for? Scoffed Ella, peeping over her shades. If the teachers are at school, then I can't show up in my dressing gown and expect them to take me seriously, Lucy said. She felt her cheeks flushing hot with embarrassment as the room stared at her, but Lucy wasn't the sort of kid who skipped school, nor did she turn up to class wearing her nightwear. She liked lessons and learning. A kid who wants to be smart is already a smart kid, Lucy said. My dad told me that once. With that, Lucy picked up her school bag, flung it over her shoulder and bounded out of her front door, pretending not to give a hoot about the other children. She began marching up the street towards Whiffington School, along the road that was usually full of cars. As it was now empty, she decided she'd walk down the middle of the road. It was an eerie sensation. She walked past Old Man Carvey's butcher shop, closed. She walked past Whiffington Library, closed. She walked past Scrumming McScroodle's Sweets and Stuff, closed, closed, closed. Whiffington was a ghost town. Suddenly, Lucy heard footsteps behind her. She whipped round and to her surprise, she saw the crowd of children from her living room following her down the middle of the street. More children were following them. Others were jogging up the pavement and kids had started filing out of their houses. There she is, Lucy heard children whisper. The girl who wants to go to school. She knows what to do. She's the one in charge. In charge? Lucy thought. Why on earth am I in charge? But before she could question it, the bunch of kids closest to her started nudging her along, forcing her to keep going, to lead them all to school. "What the jiggins?" Lucy said. "Hang on just a tick." And with that, the children stopped. "First of all, I'm not in charge," Lucy said. The children stood still, waiting to hear a second of all. "Second of all," Lucy hadn't thought of a second of all yet. Second of all, we're already late, so we better get a move on." She licked her hand, slicked her fringe over to one side and marched on towards the school with a new army of children still in their PJs and slippers following closely behind. Some of the little ones even still dragging their favourite teddy along for the adventure. Lucy suddenly felt a sense of achievement. They were taking control. Things were about to get better. Or so she thought. The muffled sound of fluffy slippers stomping over the pavement filled the air as they walked towards the school. Surely there would be a grown-up there who could help. But when they arrived at the large iron gates of Whiffington School, Lucy stopped dead in her tracks, causing everyone to bump into each other behind her. "I'm really sorry that you all followed me here, but the school gates are locked," Lucy said, lifting up the big metal padlocks that everyone could see. Then she peered through the bars of the gates, looking for any sign of life inside, but the windows of the school were dark and cold. No grown-ups were in there today. Lucy gulped, as hundreds of faces stared disappointingly at her. "So now what do we do?" a little voice cried out. "I don't know," Lucy replied, feeling awful that she'd let everyone down. "Oh, if only I had a pin. I've got my lock-picking badge, you know," Norman said, proudly pointing at it. "Where have all the grown-ups gone?" whined Ella. "I don't know that either," said Lucy. "I believe they might have gone due east," said Norman, checking his compass against the position of the sun. "Why is this happening?" the children cried. "I don't know!" Lucy yelled, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "I don't know what's happening, why it's happening, where the grown-ups have gone or when they're coming back. I just woke up like everyone else and found my mum was missing. That's all. I don't have the answers. I'm just a kid like you." Everyone let out a long, disappointed sigh. The younger kids hugged their teddy bears as their bottom lips started trembling. They'd all hoped that Lucy would be like one of those super smart kids they'd all seen in the movies. You know, those movies where things go wrong and somehow there's always one kid who knows how to sort it all out. What they didn't realise was that Lucy Dunkston was one of those kids. She just didn't know it yet. "You might as well all go home and wait there. It's probably the safest thing to do," Lucy said. Slowly, the children started to leave. They hung their heads and dragged their feet in the dirt as they wandered back through the empty streets to their empty houses. Lucy rested her head on the cold gates. No mum, no police, no teachers, no cereal. This is bad, she thought. She was just about to start trudging home herself when a gust of wind blew past her face, causing her to turn away. It whooshed over the playground and towards the front door of the school. Sometimes the wind gusts in just the right place, at just the right time, blowing you in the right direction. That's when Lucy saw it. Flapping in the breeze, like a hand waving at her. It was a piece of paper pinned to the front door of the school. Her heart stopped. "Wait!" she cried, and all the children stopped in their tracks and turned back. "Look!" she added, pointing at the piece of paper on the door. Without thinking, Lucy started climbing one of the large iron gates. Just as her fingers gripped the top, her foot slipped through the gap of the metal bars. She managed to cling on tight with her hands, but her feet were dangling uselessly beneath her, swinging this way and that, unable to find a foothold. Everyone gasped. Then all of a sudden, Norman did the strangest thing. He ran over to Lucy and crouched down underneath on all fours like some sort of dog. "What are you doing?" Lucy strained as she gripped the top of the gate. "Someone needs to get on my back," Norman said so quietly that hardly anyone heard him. "Someone get on his back!" Ella blasted. The kids suddenly realised what Norman was trying to do. Make a human pyramid. Quickly, 2 older girls from the hockey team crouched on the floor next to him, and a couple more kids climbed onto their backs. Finally, the tips of Lucy's toes brushed against someone's bottom and she could step on them, completing the pyramid. "Thanks," Lucy said as she swung her legs over the gate with ease, dropped down into the empty playground and ran towards the small piece of paper that was pinned to the door. She reached up, plucked out the pin and took the paper down. Her hands shook with nerves as she flipped it over, inspecting it. It was a letter, and judging by the writing on the front, it was meant for them. As she looked more closely at the dirty brown writing, she began to worry what this letter might say. Something about the word on the front suddenly seemed frightening. Children. Perhaps it was the way that it glistened in the sunlight, not in a nice way, in a horrid, sticky sort of way. "Pass me the pin," Norman said, stretching his open hand through the gates. Lucy handed it to him and he set to work picking the lock. After a few seconds of fiddly finger work, Norman had the school gates open so that Lucy could rejoin the rest of the children. "Told you," he said to Ella with a brace-revealing grin as he proudly rubbed his lock-picking badge. "Read it then, Lucy," Ella cried. With a trembling hand, Lucy straightened the paper and took a deep breath. "What does it say?" Norman asked, pulling a pair of reading glasses out of his scout uniform pocket. In the same dirty brown writing was this: "Dear children, we have gone away forever. Sorry, have fun. From the grown-ups. Kiss. P.S. Don't worry about cleaning up after yourselves." Everyone was silent. The grown-ups had gone away forever. The children were alone. No grown-ups to watch over them, no grown-ups to tell them what to do, no grown-ups to stop them doing whatever they wanted. Lucy nervously lowered the letter as the crowd of children burst into celebration, cheering, high-fiving. It was their town now. "I've got a very bad feeling about this," Lucy said to herself. "Me too," said Norman, who Lucy hadn't noticed was standing beside her, reading the letter over her shoulder. "This is the best day ever!" cried Ella's voice from deep within the joyous crowd. You see, that chapter wasn't scary, was it? Imagine a world where there were no grown-ups telling you, "Don't eat 12 chocolate bars," and "Don't sit so close to the telly," or "Don't climb out of that window of that 4-story building." Just imagine that. What would you get up to if there were no grown-ups? That'd make a good chapter. Let's see what Lucy did. Thank you very much for watching me read from my book, The Creakers, illustrated by Shane Devries. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe, keep reading, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye. Oh, and don't forget to check under the bed for Creakers. Good luck.